How will the Latitude Financial breach impact Australians?
And is time running out for TikTok? Hi there. Welcome back to Vertical Hold Behind the Tech News, where we discuss Mr. Squiggle all day long. No, wait, that's not what we do. We're the award winning tech podcast where we catch up with Australia's leading tech journalists and commentators to dive into the big tech stories of the week, few of which involve Mr. Squiggle. I'm Alex Kidman, joined as always by my co host, Adam Turner.
Yeah, and I'm getting very excited about this Mr. Squiggle spin-off, actually. I'm already planning. This is going to be huge.
Look, I think the rights might be a little bit tricky to get.
True.
We're also joined once again by Josh Taylor from The Guardian Australia. Josh, the Mr. Squiggle rights, they're probably a bit expensive, but they're also probably a bit dated. We're showing our age here. Which children's show should we actually do a podcast about?
I don't know. I think Mr. Squiggle is right for it because it seems to be one of those ones that the ABC is not really doing all that much with. So it's kind of just sitting there at the moment. I don't know. I reckon you could do something with it.
And there's a lot of good material. Hurry up.
Well, you create the material as you go by just flipping it upside down and drawing on it. It's brilliant.
Would be like a whiteboard, one of those like interactive whiteboards now, and not so much a blackboard anymore.
Yeah, you'd probably use AI to generate the images as well. This is getting sad, actually. I want to move off. Yes, I want to move off this, and that's also because Josh is not, in fact, here to discuss legendary Australian children's characters, but instead the implications of Latitude Financial's seemingly growing data breach and what's happening in the world of TikTok, if indeed TikTok has a world left to be in by the time you hear this podcast. But first, we're going to head over to the rapid fire news desk. And this week, we had a fresh entry from our soup du jour, the NBN, announcing that they were shifting 24,000 premises from satellite to fixed wireless. Josh, what's the benefit for a consumer in not being on satellite and being on fixed wireless?
I think you just have to talk to anyone who's on the satellite service to be told what the advantage is. So essentially, it's at a point now where the fixed wireless, they're able to upgrade it and get a whole lot more people on it and make it a lot better for them. And by doing that and they're basically freeing up capacity because it's a very limited resource that they've got on the satellite for people to be able to use it. So it's at this point where a lot of people who are on satellite are extremely frustrated by it all the time. And a lot of them are looking to like Starlink and other alternatives as that, but NBN's going, no, we're going to fix it, and that's their way of fixing it is basically to offload a lot of people onto it, and then that means that they can actually download a fair bit more, actually can stream things because that was a constant complaint. It's basically just for email. So yeah, it's good for everyone, I think.
It's not just about speeds, though. Are there caps that the satellite users face that other people don't face, I think?
They've relaxed that a little bit, I think, in recent months. Like I think they've introduced sort of like peak hours and non-peak hours where you can download things, but they've widened that a little bit. So I think it's got a little bit better. But obviously, the one thing that satellite is always going to have issue with is latency. So
yeah,
kids who want to game on NBN satellite probably not going to be able to do it very well.
You might just be able to play Minesweeper. But on the cheaper front, it varies by plan and it varies by the data caps. You can get. It's a lot easier, though, to get a fixed wireless unlimited data plan, whereas for satellite, they're trialing different models. I don't think they've really settled on this is what it's going to be for everyone thing, although they are planning to do this quite a bit more. NBN Co told me I think their final plan is to shift like 120,000 homes over to fixed wireless from satellite. But I think some of that also includes some of the really weird stuff they did early in the FTTN build where they shifted people straight from having actual fixed line to, no, your entire town's now on satellite because that's just going to be easier for us.
Yeah, there was a bit of shuffling of the numbers there to try and get it done as quickly as possible, I think, back in the day.
For sure. Well, speaking of back in the day, the ThinkPad was an IBM brand. I mean, some of us have been around long enough to remember when that was true. And then, of course, ThinkPads and the entire IBM PC business got bought by Lenovo, who also own Motorola Mobility, the phone arm of that. Adam, this week they've kind of announced the hybrid love child is coming to Australia, haven't they?
Yes, the ThinkPad was always like the Volvo of notebooks, boxy but good. And the ThinkPhone is going for that same kind of look It's going for the same aesthetic. It's even got the little red button on the side. But the big part of it is that Motorola are really nailing home their tools to make Windows and Android work more tightly together. And if you're an Apple user, you'd see a lot of this already with continuity and stuff like that. As you jump between devices, the clipboard over here works over here. You can get your unified messages. So Lenovo is really bringing home this idea of when you're sitting there with your computer and your phone working side by side, they can be working together. You can even have your phone on your computer and your computer on your phone, and it gets very, convoluted at that point.
Josh, do you reckon you could be enticed into buying a specific brand Android phone that sort of looks like the laptop you might have?
I mean, I was just looking at the photos then. It does look quite nice, and it does make me have a little bit of flashbacks to the old ThinkPad days, but I'm very much buried in the Apple ecosystem, and there's no escape at this point in time, I think. But I do think we're going to see a lot more of that, and it's good to see companies that aren't Apple trying to get that seamless experience across phones and desktops sort of down pat, because I think that's where people want to be going at the moment. They want to just pick up the phone and then drag that over to their computer and just keep going.
Yeah, there's been some interesting tries at it before. Samsung's got its whole DeX thing. Motorola's been plugging away at this, but for the
Atrix,
ThinkPhone,
cough, cough.
Oh boy, the Atrix. Yeah, I'd forgotten about that. I think it was possibly best forgotten. But the ThinkPad, I think, is also, they're really seriously pitching it as this kind of business phone. This is perhaps not the phone that you buy because you want it for its amazing camera qualities.
Yeah, it would be one of those things. If we're going to, we'll be talking about the TikTok ban soon, but we've gotten into a space now where a lot of business phones are consumer, and maybe we'll start to see a shift back to that when people are like, work devices are actually just work devices.
Possibly. Speaking of launches, we've also finally seen the launch of Apple Music Classical with its own app. Josh, are you a big classical music fan? As an Apple user, does this get you excited?
So I had a look at the app yesterday, and it does look quite nice. I mean, it doesn't look too different from the regular Apple Music app, but I think it's like, I don't really understand, apart from the fact that they bought out another company to basically make this app. I don't really understand why it needs to be a separate app. I'm not really sure what the difference is between that and I guess the regular Apple Music app, but it might be good to put something on while I'm working to concentrate a little bit. But yeah, I can't see myself using it all that much.
Is there any music available via this app that's not available via general Apple Music anyway?
I couldn't tell you off the top of my head, but I like, from looking at the playlists and the stuff they put together, it looked very similar to
Pretty much
how
the same.
all the Apple genres are done.
There's some weird differences, and I think some of this has to do with the fact that they did buy out another app. This is kind of their Appleified version of that app. The big one that really struck me is it's a separate app. It's part of your Apple Music subscription, so you can't just subscribe to classical, although I know some people who would probably be keen on that. But there's no offline download support. And the way you get around that is by sending a playlist from Apple Music Classical to Apple Music and downloading it in that app.
That's so strange. Like, that just seems like they haven't thought it through. I mean, that's been sort of the perennial complaint about Apple Music in particular. I think it has improved a lot in the past few years from where it was when Spotify was big and was like entering the market. But I still think there's some bits and pieces here where it doesn't feel like they've really nailed what people are looking for in music apps. And I think, like, just doing basic stuff like the downloading playlist stuff is just sort of indicative of that, I think.
So it really seems like another week, another data breach in Australia. And not just another data breach, but they keep getting bigger. We've got Latitude Financial. Josh, talk us through what's happened there and why it's such a big deal.
Yeah, so this gave me a lot of Medibank vibes when the news started to come out this week, because initially they were really sort of saying, they were saying not very many customers were affected, and then by Monday it was actually up to 14 million customers exposed, and the data that they've got dates back to 2005 for some customers. So there are like almost 8 million license numbers, 53,000 passport numbers, and like almost 6 million of the records that they've got were held before 2013. So this means that they've had this data for more than 10 years. And it's really just, I mean, in addition to the fact that this breach, we don't really know much of the detail about how this breach happened, who was attacked, whether it was. I mean, they've sort of indicated that it was they were able to gain someone's credentials via a third-party application, but we don't really know more than that. But just the fact, I think, that they kept data for such a long time is probably meaning that, in addition to the impact this is going to have on all the customers who are affected, I think the hammer might come down a bit hard on Latitude. Well, potentially when the Information Commissioner starts to look into this sort of stuff.
So just to clarify, um, they're not required to hold that data for that long, are they?
So from what the laws I've seen, there's only sort of like, I think 8 years is maybe the most for a lot of these things. Like there's definitely no reason for them to keep it, what we're seeing 10 or 18 years in some cases. So there's definitely like under existing, this is even before we talk about the potential changes to the Privacy Act that the government is looking at the moment. They're not supposed to keep this data for any longer than they necessarily need to. So it just sort of is a bit bewildering that they're keeping this for this long.
A lot of people might be thinking, that's okay, I've never heard of Latitude Financial. This has got nothing to do with me. How could it have something to do with them? What does Latitude Financial
I
do?
mean, yeah, that's the thing. They are financial service providers for a lot of retailers, including JB Hi-Fi, the Good Guys, and all those sorts of companies. So even though you might not think that you're a customer of them, if you've gotten some sort of credit or loan from one of those retailers, it's probably through Latitude, and you're just probably not aware of it.
So if I went for one of those 50-month interest-free kind of deals, then
Yeah.
they've probably got my details, and now someone else has probably got my details.
Yeah, that's it exactly. And I think that a lot of people are probably not aware that they were potentially a direct customer of that. So yeah, it's one of those things. I'm a bit worried about the other thing that's worrying me about this, and it hasn't really gotten as much attention as the Optus and the Medibank data breaches. And I think that is potentially because there's a little bit of a data breach fatigue now already. And I think you'll probably find that a lot of people who were hit in the Optus or the Medibank data breaches are also caught up in this one. So I think we can't really be complacent about it. And you might get into a situation where if enough of your data is pulled together from these different data breaches, and I should say that as far as we're aware, I've spoken to cybersecurity experts yesterday. I don't think that the data has been posted on the dark web yet. It still seems to be in they're threatening to release it stage. But if that does happen at some point, then it's possible to potentially pull different bits of information together and then conduct identity fraud there. So that's one thing that I think people need to be aware of.
Do we have any indication at this point as to how much they're asking for the data?
Yeah, well, not so far as I'm aware. It's like
one PP touch.
No.
I mean, I think we never really knew exactly how much they wanted for Medibank either. I think there was something like I think it was like $1 million or something like that, but it wasn't like a huge amount. And all the security experts now say don't pay, even though a lot of people still do pay, just because it's one of it's one of those things that even if you do pay, you can't really sort of expect that it won't get out. I don't remember if they ended up changing the law when they changed all those cybersecurity things. I think they're still looking at potentially making it illegal to pay for ransomware. Pay people who are doing ransomware attacks on you, but I think it's something they're still looking at.
So once again, we're talking about 8 million driver's licenses, tens of thousands of passport numbers. How many times are people going to have to get their driver's license and passport number replaced? Do we need a better system?
Yeah, so I think this will be where the government, I mean, the Home Affairs Minister Claire O'Neill's statement that she released on Monday about Latitude pointed to the fact that the government is now looking at some sort of digital version of identity, which will hopefully reduce the amount of times you need to hand over these numbers to different organizations, because they won't need to keep it on record, because like one government agency will happen until that government agency is hacked, of course. And so I think that's probably where they're going to pursue it. I think some of the changes that were brought in with the Optus and the Medibank breaches themselves will carry over to this one, in terms of I think in Queensland they reissued the licenses with a second number that will make it harder for people to just you can't use it as a form of ID verification without that second number as well. So stuff like that, I think that that it's sort of a bit of a stopgap measure, but um, hopefully some of the things that they brought in last time will help this time.
So on the big enterprise end of things, it would seem to be a bit of a no-brainer to say, hey, make sure your databases are locked down and you're keeping the information you need. But from the end user point of view, I mean, what can consumers actually do in these kind of situations?
Yeah, it's one of those things where you're basically a captive victim to these companies say they need to hold this data, they need to take it from you to verify who you are, particularly like when you're going through a loans process or something like that. Um, or I guess all you can do is um, if you're aware of a company potentially holding data on you that you have dealt with a few years ago, and you don't think that they need to have data, maybe talk to them and say, "Can you delete my data?" We don't have like a right to be deleted thing yet, but you can request that data be destroyed if they no longer require it. And I think some of the changes to the Privacy Act
Yeah.
will streamline that and make that a bit easier. But again, it comes down to like um, users should not have to be responsible for this. Like companies should be proactive, and like I think we have yet to see it, but the fines now for businesses that are caught doing being very reckless and not keeping data properly is now $50 million. But that still requires the information commissioner to investigate the case, take the case to court, and seek those penalties, and then for the court to rule that. And that's still like a long way down the road, and we still haven't seen that happen since. I mean, it's only a couple months since the law changed, but um, the we haven't even seen the outcomes of the investigations into Optus or Medibank yet.
So I guess part of the problem is that, like, the financial services companies like Latitude would argue, and they'd be right. Look, the law says we have to gather this kind of information. We need to do these kind of security checks beforehand. But then the law is very vague on what happens afterwards, like 18 years later. So do you
Mm.
think that the laws that are so strict about what they need to do up front need to be extended to say there is a deadline of 18 months, whatever, that you must destroy this data
Mm.
unless you've got a good reason not to, which there's nothing that concrete at the moment, is there?
Yeah, I think like the combination of if the fines are actually enforced and it becomes more than the cost of doing business,
Mm.
that will create a better incentive for these companies to do better. I think if we introduce the tort of privacy as proposed in the Privacy Act review, which would allow rather than what we've got with Latitude and the other companies that I mentioned before, where you've got law firms looking at potential class actions. If an individual has had their privacy breached, they would be able to take the company that breached their privacy to court, and like it wouldn't need to go through the whole class action process, which does take a lot of time, and a lot of people don't ever really get that much out of it. So
One of the nastier issues with this that we definitely saw with Optus, I can't recall if Medibank's hit it, and I don't recall seeing anything for Latitude on it, is the other end effect of this is you get the scam contacts from companies that are not Latitude Financial
mm.
saying, we just need to verify your details so we can tell you how much you've lost. Um, am I wrong? Has that actually started to happen with the Latitude leak?
I haven't seen that with Latitude yet, but it still seems like quite early. And I think the other factor is that, unlike what happened with Optus and Medibank, we haven't had any instances where that data is available online somewhere where they can see who the customers are. So for them, I think for a lot of scammers now, it would be sort of blind
Blind phishing,
guessing. Yeah,
literally.
like
Well,
so
that's what
there are
half of
probably
scamming is.
it is exactly like they've got many other scams they can do that on already. It's
Yeah.
they can text it's mom, I've got a new phone and I need some money. That's much more effective for them, I guess.
Because I believe Latitude has said that they have contacted. I think back when this was only 300,000 or whatever it
Mm,
was affected customers. I believe Latitude had said they had contacted affected customers and that they
yeah,
will cover the cost of replacement documents and so on.
yeah. They've said they've cost that, and the government has indicated that Latitude is being quite helpful in terms of responding to it. I tried to get them to say whether they thought it was a sophisticated attack or if Latitude had been reckless, but they weren't biting it. So it seemed to be um, working quite well with Latitude at this point in time.
Is there a reason why these attacks seem to be getting bigger and happening more often?
Yeah, I mean, we don't really know. I mean, we don't really know how big how this was able to get through. It just seems to be we just seem to be in a stage where this keeps happening over and over again, and this is the largest one in Australia now, but Medibank was the largest one before that, and Optus was the largest one before that. So we seem to be in a phase where this just keeps happening, and it's it's now affecting a lot of people. But I can't really when you talk to when I talked to experts last year about this in terms of are we seeing a lot more? They're saying that the number of attacks is like steadily increasing. It's not really like shooting up or anything like that. But I think we're just seeing much larger targets and much larger data sets being affected now. So many more individuals, I guess, as a result, being affected.
And do the businesses have an obligation to disclose this now that they didn't have in the past?
I mean, the like notifiable data breach laws
Yeah.
are in place there. So they definitely do. I think that's the other thing. Like more often than not, they are required to inform, I guess, the customers and then um, the information commissioner. So I think that's probably the other thing. We're hearing more and more about this because companies are abiding by their reporting obligations as well.
And I mean, they don't have to be big breaches to be significant because
Mm.
obviously, your own personal records only have to be compromised once
Yep.
for it to be a problem. This week, we've also seen, I think it's Meriton, the hotel and developer mob. They've said they had a cybersecurity incident compromising 35.6 gig of data.
Mm. Yeah, I mean the other one that's going is the PSYOP one as well, which is basically a whole bunch of companies like University of Melbourne, Tasmanian government as well, where you it's not really them directly that have been affected, but they're all using this third party file sharing service, and the file sharing service has been affected. So the people have been able to get data through there, and so it's probably not a huge amount of data, but they've all had to go through this reporting obligations as well. So we're finding out about that through that process as well as the hackers posting online who they've got data from.
So it turns out that good security costs money, but it might be cheaper than having all your customer data records nicked.
Yeah, it's I'm hoping that at some point people will learn from it, but I think that's probably the other thing, the other factor that probably needs to be brought in. Like, uh, we did see a bit of this with Medibank, and hopefully we see this with Latitude as well, where they're fully upfront and transparent about how it happened, so that other businesses can learn from them. And I think that's the only way we can sort of prevent this sort of stuff from happening in the future.
Hey there. Hope you're enjoying the show so far. And if you are, don't forget to subscribe. Vertical Hold is available on every podcast platform you've ever heard of, and probably several that you haven't as well. And if you've got any feedback or any thoughts on the topics we cover on this week's show or any episode, feel free to get in touch. We do love to hear from our listeners. So I am a veteran journo, which basically means I'm old, and Adam's been in the journalism game for exactly as long as I have, but obviously I won't be as rude as to call him old. But that means that we're the wrong generation for TikTok. Josh, you're quite a bit younger than we are.
I'm still quite a bit not the right generation for TikTok, but I'm
I
closer
wanted to
to it.
You're flatter
closer. Yeah.
Explain to me why so many worldwide governments are saying, hey, government employees, you cannot have TikTok on your phone. What do they hate about short looping kitten videos?
They hate that it is one of the most popular apps in the world, and it is an app that was developed by a Chinese company. That's basically the sum of it. It's I mean, there have been a lot of stories about things that the TikTok app can do, including like key logging and things like that, which is a cause for concern. But a lot of it seems to stem from the fact that uh, ByteDance is a Chinese company and therefore has to comply with Chinese national security laws. And there's a possibility that people's data, their location, things like that a lot of these apps, regardless of where they're located, hoover up anyway. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all of these apps are notorious for collecting a lot of data on their users. But when you factor in the fact that like national security laws apply to TikTok in China, that just adds a different dimension to it. And I think that's why we're seeing a lot of concern about how it's being used. So I think that's probably the main thing. Whenever I've reported on this, I try to sort of stress that other social media platforms can be just as bad or worse. But there is that, I guess, that Cold War-esque type undercurrent that's under everything in terms of US, UK, and Australia and China at the moment.
So as you say, is ByteDance is the almost I said ByteSide. ByteDance is the company that owns TikTok, and they're a Chinese company, so they are obligated, regardless of what they say about where they keep their data and how many Chinese walls they put in between. They are obligated to cooperate with the Chinese government when the Chinese government wants something. Yes.
Yeah, and they basically have no real powers to object or anything like that. I mean, you, I'm not going to be an apologist for China or the national security law, but we do have similar laws in Australia
And
that
America, that's what I
require.
was.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
the point I was about to make next. Is that Facebook and Twitter would face the exact same laws in the US, and the
yeah.
US have the ability to go into any company and say, "Give us what we want, and don't tell anybody we're here." Just the way the
Mm.
Chinese can do it. It's the same on both sides, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, you only have to look like a decade ago at all the Snowden revelations, where it was
Mm.
basically all the spy agencies were hoovering up all people's telecommunications data um, willy nilly before I guess we got to the over the top layer apps. So yeah, a lot of this stuff does go on, but I think it's just from a government perspective, the reason why the Australian government looks to be on the verge of banning it from government devices is they just want to add that little extra layer of security in terms of like, we don't want this on government devices. We need to make sure that it's secure. And I think there is an argument to be made that, putting TikTok aside, there is little reason for people to have social media apps on their work phones anyway, except if they're in like a social media role. So like I'm not surprised that this is a thing. There was a thing down here in Victoria where I think about 68 um, environment department phones were found to have TikTok on them before the department preemptively banned it and then unbanned it. Um, but I was speaking to people who know what's going on there, and they're like, there is no reason for any of these staff to have TikTok on their phone. It's basically they just bored at work and want to watch some 10-second videos or whatever.
You alluded to it earlier, but is the concept of a work phone and a personal phone sort of gone these days? Do people still carry I mean, I've worked for myself for 17 years, so they didn't hand out work phones when I worked for the paper. But
Mm.
are there a lot of people who still have that separate work device? And if they've got their personal phone in their pocket,
Mm.
why do they need TikTok on their work phone, or is it one phone?
I would think that if you're a government employee, you probably still want to treat your work phone separately from your personal phone.
Hmm.
If nothing else, then I like just thinking from a freedom of information point of view, like um, I could FOI everything on their phone, and if their personal phone is their work phone, it's not going to be good for them. So
Yeah.
That could get messy, presuming they don't redact everything, of course.
that's true. That's true.
Although this does bring up another thought, which is if TikTok is doing all of this data hoovering, and it seems clear that they are, along with lots of other social media companies, then that work phone and personal phone thing becomes a bit redundant. Because if I'm walking
Mm.
around my government department and I've got my work phone and it doesn't have TikTok on it because, the department of whatever says I can't,
Mm.
but I've got my personal phone and it's sitting there going, right, well, Alex is in this location and he's doing this, and
Mm.
maybe it's got microphone access. Doesn't it become a little bit moot? Do they need to start having a no TikTok on any device you've got kind of edict?
That might be the next edict. I mean, the US is already looking at like a total ban, but I
Mm.
think that's probably more to pressure ByteDance into selling or splitting so that like TikTok itself will be a company that's based in the US and everything is in the US. We did see that a few years ago. So with like the gay dating app Grinder, it used to be
Mm.
owned, it was bought out by a Chinese company, and then um, they started getting worried because in addition to like randomly selling a lot of the data to third party marketers and stuff like that, it was easy for people who were located on in a defense base or something like that to be found because like it tells you what the location is. That's part of the app.
Mm.
You know where the location is, and that obviously presents a security risk when it's a Chinese owned company that has all this data. So they made Grindr sell to an American company a few years ago, and I wouldn't be surprised if that's where TikTok ultimately ends up if it doesn't get banned in the US.
So I think they were making the offer to house their data in Texas, I think it
Mm,
was,
yep.
but not necessarily to sell outright. And I think the Chinese government did a little bit of saber rattling around whether or not they like this idea of TikTok being forced to sell, which doesn't suggest they're not interested in TikTok's data.
Yeah, I would not be surprised. I think there's probably a bit of like they see TikTok as one of the great successes of China as well. So it would like it's a bit ego bruising, I guess. At the same time, it'd be fascinating to see though what would happen if TikTok was suddenly banned, whether people would just shift to other apps or find ways around it. I read an interesting story a couple of weeks ago where TikTok stopped allowing Russian users to see new content. So they have for Russia, TikTok is frozen at the start of the war in Ukraine, like over a year ago. So they have no new content on it. They can only just see everything that came up before it, and they can't create anything new. So they've had to sort of live in this time bubble now. So yeah, it would be interesting to see what like comes next of it. I guess if it does get banned.
There's a different angle to this that I haven't heard people talk about. I'm wondering if you've heard anything about this. A similar thing is that a lot of governments have said that they don't want Chinese companies building their networks. Like the Australian government didn't want, I think it was Huawei involved with bits of the NBN. And part of
Any
the
of it,
fear
in
is,
fact.
well, any of it, but there's a couple of concerns there. One is that basically they could be tapping into data and listening to it. But two, worst case scenario, we have a war with China. The first attack is going to be a cyber attack, a digital attack. And if they basically have a kill switch and can shut down a lot of our networks, that's a big problem. Is there also a fear that if something like TikTok is on a lot of government devices and it has some ability to, I don't know, exploit some 0-day attack, which means it can take out that device, cripple that device, take over that device, then with a flick of a switch, they can also, take half the public service offline. Has anyone been talking about this?
I think that's probably like the further sort of extreme end of what people are concerned about. I think it is probably a fear that they want to basically get out ahead of. So it's something that they're probably front of mind about. But I haven't sort of seen any, even sort of the most sort of China hawky kind of politicians suggest that is like what they're trying to prevent. All their concern at the moment seems to be around like potential spying at the moment more than any sort of like war with China, like what the first move would be.
Well, that just about wraps up another episode of Vertical Hold. Thanks to Josh for joining us at Vertical Hold this week.
Thanks for having me again. It's been great.
And Josh, now it's time, as it usually is at the end of the show, for the Vertical Hold 3 questions of doom. I'll ask them all, and then you can answer them in any order you like. So, where can people find your work online? Where can they find you on various social media of your choosing? And given your status as one of Australia's most awarded tech writers, what's your favourite story you've written over the years?
So people can find me at The Guardian. Just look for Josh Taylor. I'm still on Twitter for now at Josh Gnosis. We'll see how long that lasts for. I'm also on Mastodon as Josh Taylor in the AU space one, but I haven't really been posting there yet. In terms of my favorite story, I think it always comes back to this in terms of like it's over a decade now, but like the 2 days before the election, figuring out the coalition was going to bring in an internet filtering policy and managing to kill it off a day before the election remains my favorite thing.
That was huge.
That was a big story.
Not come back yet. I mean, the e-safety commission is there trying to get somewhere now, but it seems like it killed it for a decade.
Top work. And as always, you can catch us online at Vertical Hold AU on Twitter, on Instagram, or the Vertical Hold Facebook page, or on the web at verticalhold.com.au.
And thanks everybody for dropping by and listening in. And don't forget to drop us a line and let us know what you love about the show.